There are certain athletes in this world who are just so transcendent that even the average person on the street knows exactly who they are without even being a fan of them. They are just so well known due to their achievements, skill, and charisma. Classic examples of this phenomenon being Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, and Wayne Gretzky, just to name a few. When it comes to football, no one even comes close to the same status as the man named Edson Arantes do Nascimento, better known as Pelé. Widely regarded as not only the greatest footballer to hail from Brazil, but the greatest footballer to have ever lived. How many can you personally think of that allegedly caused a ceasefire during a civil war just so both sides could watch him play? How many can claim to have led their home country to 3 FIFA World Cup victories? His skill on the pitch was incomparable. His effortless agility, along with his almost superhuman ability to improvise on the pitch, were certainly something to behold. And that's not even mentioning his talent for scoring goals, popularizing the now infamous bicycle kick. And even after his professional career ended, Pelé remained in the public eye with his charity work. With his passing at the age of 82 in December of 2022, now is a good time to take a brief look at one of football's greatest legends. As seems to be the case with many of the greats, Pelé didn't have the most prosperous start to life. Born in Três Corações on the 23rd of October 1940, the first of 3 children to Celeste and Dondino. It wasn't until he began school he would inadvertently gain his infamous nickname of Pelé. There are a few stories explaining how he got the name, the most popular one being that it stems from an incorrect pronunciation of another footballer called Pelé. But the man himself explains another possible reason.
When I started to play with the kids in another city where my father went to play, because my father was a soccer player too. Then I don't know if I made some mistake, because in Portuguese, when you kick with the foot, go pé. Maybe because I made some mistake, I didn't kick well, they said Pelé. I fight with everybody, no, my name is Edson.
And just to make things a little bit more complicated, within his own family, he was known by yet another nickname, Dico.
What do you call yourself now? If you come home and you put the key in the door, do you shout, "Hi, it's me, Pelé," or Edson? What do you call yourself?
Actually, people gonna be surprised. If you arrive in my house, either Pelé, either Edson, my family call me Dico.
Dico?
Dico.
So you've got 3 names.
But I just, no, of course, now Pelé, I love Pelé. It's a big, important for me.
Despite his father, Dondino, being a notable footballer himself, known for scoring the most goals in one game using only headers, the family lived in relative poverty. Especially when Dondino moved his family to Bauru and experienced a career-shortening knee injury when Pelé was 5 or 6 years old. To help out, Pelé would take up a number of jobs, including shoe shining and waiting tables. After briefly toying around with the idea of becoming a pilot, Pelé decided to follow in his father's footsteps and become a footballer, which his mother was not too keen on. Unfortunately, due to the family's level of poverty, Pelé was not able to afford an actual football. His father took it upon himself to train Pelé, resorting to using fruit and a sock filled with newspapers or rags as a makeshift football. This unorthodox means of training no doubt contributed to Pelé's superior skills on the pitch later on in life. He began playing football with local kids in his neighbourhood, who were referred to as the shoeless ones, due to them not wearing shoes when they played.
Final seconds now on field number 1. Go! And there's the final whistle. The Kings win 8-0. Come back tomorrow for the final, where the Kings will take on team number 7.
Hey! They are called the shoeless ones.
When Pelé was 9 years old, Brazil lost to Uruguay in the 1950 FIFA World Cup final. This was such a devastating blow for the nation of Brazil, as this was the closest the country had ever come to winning the World Cup. What perhaps made this even more devastating was that Brazil was the hosting nation. Pelé's father took it especially bad and even resorted to tears. However, Pelé made this prophetic statement to his father, stating, "Don't worry, soon I will win the World Cup."
My father used to say, "Oh, man should be strong, man doesn't cry." Then I saw my father cry when Brazil lost the game. Then I told him, "Father, no, don't worry, I'm gonna win one World Cup for you, don't worry." I was 9 to 10 years old.
Pelé got noticed for his burgeoning skills as he played for several youth clubs, including a local amateur club called Bauru Athletic Juniors, which is where he caught the eye of one of the coaches, Valdemir Berito. Valdemir was a retired pro footballer turned talent scout and coach who took part in the 1934 FIFA World Cup, which resulted in a 3-1 defeat to Spain. He scored 68 goals during his professional career throughout a variety of different clubs, including Sao Paulo and San Lorenzo. Upon witnessing Pelé's skill on the pitch firsthand, Valdemir knew he was destined for greatness, and even stated as much when, in 1956, he brought Pelé and his father to Santos FC for a tryout. Valdemir allegedly stood in front of the club's officials and prophesied that Pelé would be the best football player in the world. Under the management of Luis Alonso Perez, Pelé signed with Santos Football Club, donning the squad number 10. Initially, Pelé was viewed with a certain amount of suspicion and uncertainty. This seemed to revolve around his age at the time, being just 15 years old, and his skin colour, with some players even referring to him as gasoline. It's no secret that racism was still quite prevalent within Brazil in the 1950s, but such prejudices soon evaporated within the club when Pelé began playing. He made his debut in a friendly match against Corinthians FC in September of that same year, scoring 1 goal for Santos, which led to a 7-1 victory. It was from this point onwards that Pelé led Santos to more victories. He was especially noted for his goal-scoring abilities, setting a record of 58 goals in a single league season, establishing Santos as one of the most successful teams in Brazil. He soon began being associated with a group within the team called Os Santásticos. These were players who were considered the most elite, cohesive, talented, and outright best in the world at the time. A quasi-rat pack of soccer, if you will. This group contained other Brazilian legends, such as Gilmar and Zito. Due to his performance, it was inevitable that Pelé would get called up to the Brazilian national team for the 1958 FIFA World Cup. There was a lot of apprehension in response to this decision because Pelé was just 17 years of age, which at the time was the youngest any player had ever entered a World Cup game. There was also concern that he would not be able to handle the pressure of representing his country in such a tournament. Nonetheless, Pelé was set to play for his country on the international stage. June 19th. The stage was set. Brazil had fought its way to the quarter-finals, which pitted them against Wales. Despite an intense stalemate throughout the first half, only 1 goal was scored in the second. Guess who was responsible for that? Despite not being the flashiest or most dramatic, Pelé's single goal knocked Wales out of the World Cup and pushed Brazil into the semi-finals. On the 24th, Brazil faced off against France and gained a more decisive victory. Brazil drew first blood within the early minutes of the game, only for France to gain the equaliser shortly after. After a further goal by Brazil, France was unable to gain the initiative, with Pelé achieving a hat-trick, scoring 3 of Brazil's 5 goals in the match. After witnessing Pelé's performance, French striker Just Fontaine said, "When I saw Pelé play, it made me feel I should hang up my boots." And so, on the 29th, Brazil found itself in the same position it was 8 years earlier when it faced off against Uruguay in the 1950 World Cup. Brazil had now made it to the finals yet again, with hosting nation Sweden standing in the way of absolute victory. Neither Brazil nor Sweden had ever won the World Cup before, and so the stakes were very high. Despite Sweden scoring first and very early on in the match, Brazil fired back with an equaliser minutes later with an additional goal that rounded off the first half of the match. Pelé again distinguished himself by scoring the first goal of the second half, widening the gap along with a further goal by teammate Edvaldo Neto. Sweden desperately tried to hang on, scraping one last goal in the final minutes of the game, but it simply just wasn't good enough. Pelé guaranteed the victory with his second goal of the match, ending in a victory of 5 goals for Brazil and 2 goals for Sweden, netting Brazil its first ever FIFA World Cup victory, and Pelé fulfilling the promise he made to his father. Pelé was oblivious to what was awaiting him back home in Brazil. While he was helping his country win its first ever World Cup, the entire nation of over 65 million people watched him do so. When stepping off the plane, Pelé was greeted with universal jubilation and awe, the kind reserved only for celebrities or conquering heroes. While all the members of the Brazilian team did their bit in securing the victory, it was Pelé who emerged as the true star. He went from relative obscurity to being Brazil's first ever celebrity athlete. His mere presence within the international team broke down racial barriers as the Brazilian people united in their love for him. Even other countries couldn't help but admire Pelé. Soon after the World Cup, a French journalist produced a 2-page article covering Pelé and referred to him as the King of Brazil, or O Rei, yet another nickname Pelé would carry for the rest of his life. Swedish defender Sigvard Parling, who played against Pelé in the final, said, "After the 5th goal, I didn't want to mark Pelé anymore. I just wanted to applaud him." There was no question that Pelé had almost overnight become an international superstar, certainly the first in the world of football. Now back home, Pelé settled back into the ranks of Santos FC and proceeded to go from strength to strength, solidifying Santos as the dominant football club as they travelled all around the world, competing in various expeditions and friendly matches. As Pelé's fame grew, many football clubs, especially Real Madrid, Juventus, and Inter Milan, began sniffing round hoping to snatch up the young star with a lucrative offer. The Brazilian government feared that Pelé might consider such an offer, which would lead to Brazil losing its most prized footballer. So, plans were made to prevent this. A temporary solution was to draft Pelé into the armed forces in 1959 as part of the country's mandatory military service. He served as part of the 6th Coastal Artillery Group in Sao Paulo. This of course did not get in the way of Pelé continuing his football career. A more permanent move to keep Pelé was made in 1961 when he was declared a national treasure by the Brazilian government, thus preventing Pelé from playing with another club in another country. This may have been an irrational fear by the Brazilian government, since Pelé frequently stated that he was happy playing for Santos and considered it an honour. In the meantime, Pelé's stardom continued to grow. His mixture of skill and speed were unparalleled. There was just simply no one who moved quite like Pelé on the pitch, and yet somehow made it look so easy. There was no question that when the 1962 World Cup approached, Pelé would again get called up to the national team. Despite Brazil beating Mexico in the qualifiers, During their second match against Czechoslovakia, Pelé early on suffered a thigh muscle injury during the first half, which ironically led to the match ending in a 0-0 draw. Pelé's injury forced him off the pitch for the remainder of the tournament, which meant his team had to soldier on without him. But Pelé supported his country from the sidelines, and with that, Brazil gained comfortable victories over England, Chile, and Czechoslovakia again in the final, giving Brazil its second World Cup win. This made Brazil one of only 2 countries ever to have 2 consecutive World Cup victories, the other being Italy. The 1966 World Cup would prove to be the worst for Pelé in terms of injuries. By the 60s, Pelé was hands down the most famous and respected footballer in the world. A lot of countries understood that Pelé was pretty much Brazil's golden boy when it came to the World Cup. And while there is no concrete evidence for this, it has been suggested that during this World Cup, certain teams targeted Pelé with a barrage of aggressive fouls in an attempt to sabotage Brazil's star player. As well as poor and even flat-out bias refereeing. This was first highlighted when Brazil faced off against Bulgaria, when Pelé was subjected to a number of attacks on the pitch, with no one being sent off. Despite this, Pelé managed to score one of the 2 goals against Bulgaria, allowing Brazil to progress in the tournament. But the damage had already been done. The injuries that Pelé sustained forced him to sit out of Brazil's match against Hungary, which ended in a 3-1 loss for Brazil. In their later match against Portugal, despite still recovering from his injuries, Pelé was again targeted with 2 particularly nasty tackles from the same player, which left Pelé visibly limping, leading to another 3-1 loss. This caused Brazil to be eliminated from the 1966 World Cup, not even reaching the quarter-finals. Pelé was left feeling very dejected upon returning home. In an interview years later, Pelé stated, "The 1966 World Cup was the toughest experience I have ever had in football. I missed part of the 1962 World Cup with injury, and in England once again. I wasn't able to play as I would have liked." Like many others, Pelé believed that the tournament was mired with unsportsmanlike conduct and weak refereeing. Pelé then vowed to never play another World Cup again. Pelé's story could have ended there, with him resting on his laurels for the remainder of his active career, but as I'm sure you already know, more was to come. In 1969, Santos was set to play against the Green Eagles in Nigeria. Unfortunately, the country was in the midst of a civil war, which by its end would result in over 1 million deaths. There were real concerns about the safety of fans, as well as the Santos players themselves. But according to the lore, both sides of the conflict agreed to a ceasefire to allow the 2 teams to play, and more specifically, see Pelé perform. Allegedly during the game, no arrests, gunshots, riots, or killings occurred, and even though the game ended in a 2-2 draw, Pelé received a standing ovation from the crowd. While this story has been romanticised, exaggerated, and even contested over the years, it did add to the mystique of Pelé. This was also the same year that Pelé scored his alleged 1000th goal at the Maracana Stadium. While the exact reason has been subject to discussion and dispute, ranging from political pressure to fan outcry to perhaps something more deep and personal to the man himself, Pelé would eventually disregard his previous promise and compete in one final World Cup. The 1970 World Cup was different from those previous. Visually, this would be the first time the tournament was broadcasted live in colour, and also marked the debut of the yellow and red card system. Mexico was the hosting nation this time around, and with Pelé back within the ranks of the Brazilian national team once more, they would go on to dominate. There would be no losses or draws for Brazil this time, only wins. starting on the 3rd of June with a comfortable 4-1 win over old rivals Czechoslovakia, moving on to beat defending champions England by 1 goal to then proceed to the knockout stage after a win over Romania. In the quarter-finals, Brazil faced their South American neighbours Peru and gained a 4-2 victory. Then, in a convenient twist of fate, Brazil found itself in the semi-finals against Uruguay. It had been just over 20 years since the two countries clashed at the 1950 World Cup, with Uruguay pulling off the upset victory, but Brazil would avenge this loss with a 4-2 win, giving us this infamous moment. Ultimately, Brazil will go on to face Italy in the final, with both countries having 2 World Cup victories under their belts. This was nothing but conclusive, with Brazil scoring 4 goals to Italy's 1. While fellow teammate Jairzinho distinguished himself during the tournament, scoring in every game he played, it was Pelé who stood out once again. He was named player of the tournament, having made several assists and scored his own share of goals. Now, with a then record-breaking 3 World Cup wins, which qualified Brazil's permanent ownership over the Jules Rimet Trophy, this would be the ultimate height of Pelé's career. With his status as a legend solidified, Pelé played out the rest of his contract with Santos FC, then decided to retire in 1974. However, due to a number of poor financial decisions and mounting debt, Pelé came back to football a year later. After a meeting with US diplomat Henry Kissinger at a cafe in Sao Paulo, Pelé was asked to make his comeback in the US. According to Pelé, Kissinger stated this to him: "Listen, you know I'm from the United States, and I'm in politics there. Soccer is coming along there. They're playing it in the schools. Would you like to help us promote soccer in the United States?" To which Pelé agreed. To facilitate this, Kissinger even contacted the Brazilian government to ask for Pelé to be released so he could be used to promote football and Brazil itself in the United States. Pelé was signed to a staggering $4.75 million 3-year contract, the largest for any athlete at the time, with the newly established New York Cosmos FC, a team that comprised of older but more established players from all over the world, leading to other legends joining later on, like Franz Beckenbauer, one of Germany's best defenders and midfielders. Much like his debut with Santos, Pelé's impact with Cosmos FC was almost instant. While basketball and baseball were the more popular sports consumed by the US public at the time, Pelé's performance with Cosmos immediately drummed up interest in the North American Soccer League, as well as football in general. Pelé spent 3 years with Cosmos and rounded off his career in the most unique way possible. In October of 1977, Pelé played his last pro match. It was Cosmos versus his old team of Santos. He played the first half with Cosmos and the second half with Santos, which resulted in Cosmos winning 2-1. More than 75,600 people were in attendance at the giant stadium to witness this match. It was certainly a fitting way for Pelé to properly end his career. Now having retired more permanently, Pelé kept himself busy with other ventures. It turns out he was not just a one-trick pony, as Pelé was also a talented songwriter and guitar player. He contributed music and vocals to the soundtrack to his own 1977 documentary film, giving it his own personal touch. He also dipped his toes into acting, with his most prominent roles being in Escape to Victory, where he starred alongside Sylvester Stallone and Michael Caine, and Hot Shot, where Pelé's character had the same name of his old club, Santos. He also made cameos in other films like Mike Bassett, England Manager, and Pelé, Birth of a Legend, a recent film based on his life. He also rubbed shoulders with some of the world's biggest celebrities and figures, from Muhammad Ali to Mick Jagger, from Queen Elizabeth to President Ronald Reagan, who once famously said, "My name is Ronald Reagan, I'm the President of the United States of America, but you don't need to introduce yourself because everyone knows who Pelé is." Perhaps the most notable thing in Pelé's later life was his dedication to charity. In 1994, he was named Goodwill Ambassador for UNICEF, an international organisation dedicated to providing assistance and aid to children, being a strong supporter of the UN's anti-poverty development goals. Pelé Foundation was set up in his name with the purpose of continuing his work, as well as giving children access to football equipment and proper training. Poverty was something which was an incredibly significant issue for Pelé, having grown up in a poor environment, not even being able to afford a football when he was a kid. Pelé even auctioned off various pieces of memorabilia for the purpose of donating the proceedings. In 1995, Pelé became the first Minister of Sports, which led to him fighting for better conditions for football players so clubs didn't take advantage of them financially. This became known as the Pelé Law. As the years went by, Pelé's health began to seriously deteriorate. After years of injuries sustained by his football career, in the 2010s, Pelé got hip replacement surgery, which severely limited his mobility. Despite this, Pelé continued attending various ceremonies and events. He underwent a further surgery to remove kidney stones, but it was in 2021 when Pelé was diagnosed with colon cancer, to which he immediately received treatment. Over a year later, Pelé caught COVID-19, which then led to a respiratory infection. But despite these issues, along with his continued chemotherapy treatment, Pelé kept his positive attitude, saying online, "I'm strong with a lot of hope, and I follow my treatment as usual." As Pelé's condition worsened, people sent words of support and best wishes. One notable statement came from England captain Henry Kane, who said the following.
Harry, we've heard today of the sad news that Pelé's been moved into palliative care. In 2015, ahead of your first international cap, he said you were an excellent player, and his advice to you was to never believe you're the best player in the world and to keep learning. Do you remember when he said that, and what impact has he had in your career?
Yeah, no, first and foremost, we send our best wishes to him and obviously always his family as well. And inspiration amongst our game, incredible footballer, incredible person. And to hear those words back then from him was really special for me. And I always feel like I'm someone who is always learning and will continue to learn for the rest of my career. So he was spot on with his advice. So of course, sad to hear that news, but we wish him well from not just me, but the whole England setup as well.
Unfortunately, chemotherapy simply wasn't enough, and on the 29th of December 2022, Pelé passed away from multiple organ failure in Albert Einstein Hospital in Sao Paulo.
Pelé, the Brazilian football legend, widely regarded as the greatest player of all time,
has died at the age of 82. The Brazilian will forever be known as one of the greatest soccer players of all time.
A soccer legend so big, he only needed one name, Pelé. Born Edson Arantes do Nascimento in 1940, nicknamed Pelé as a child, he was made to play football.
He's been battling colon cancer for 15 months. He'd been in Sao Paulo in hospital since the end of November, and his health had worsened. His family, of course, as you probably heard, spent Christmas by his side. And now the news that is reaching us this evening from various agencies who are starting to break this news is that Pelé, the great Pelé, has very sadly died at the age of 82. His achievements in the game, absolutely vast. Of course, as I say, he won the World Cup 3 times with Brazil. He is their joint all-time leading scorer with 77 goals. And boy, could this guy score a goal.
When news broke of Pelé's death, to say that the entire world united in grief at the loss of such a legend would be a massive understatement. The Brazilian government announced a 3-day national mourning, while a momentous outpouring of support and respect was shown as various tributes came flooding in from all over the planet. Thousands of people came to witness his funeral and pay respects, including some of his former teammates. Huge crowds of fans flooded the streets of Santos where Pelé first got his start, just to accompany the procession. His casket was loaded onto a fire engine draped in the Brazilian flag and taken through the streets. After a more private funeral for his family, Pelé was then taken to his final resting place at the world's tallest cemetery, along with his father, who died in 1996. It was an event reserved for royalty, which is entirely fitting as he was known as the King. The person who coined the phrase, the beautiful game. The person who invented the Cruyff turn 10 years before the man who is credited for the maneuver, Johan Cruyff, performed it himself. The person who didn't allow ego or pride to taint his personality. Instead, he gave praise to his father and his higher power for all his success.
My father always told me football is a gift from God. And God gave you this gift, just as He gives a song to a musician or a singer. So you have to take care of your health, how you prepare yourself. You always have to respect your opponent. And if you do all that, then you'll be a great player, and no one will stop you.
It's only fitting that we end this with a timeless quote from the man himself.